Okay, this video is How to Write Better, Part 1. And I'll just start with a couple pictures to give the background and it'll make sense. This right here is Plato. And Plato was kind of pompous. Yes, he was a great genius, but he was also kind of pompous. Someone asked him to define what is a man, and he said a featherless biped. So Diogenes, who was sort of the funny philosopher of those days in Athens, plucked a chicken and said, "Behold, Plato's idea of a man." And I'm going to get into why do I talk about the Greeks? Briefly, I'll talk about the Greeks because the Greeks were brilliant and we'll learn some valuable things from them. But this was just to get things started. Plato was a philosopher, but he really wished he was a playwright. And he was jealous of the playwrights, and that's how we kind of got going with that. Here is the greatest writer, speaker of Rome, is Cicero. And Cicero was famous for the Ciceronian sentence, the periodic sentence, where the climax is at the end. He said, "To not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child." And so what I'm getting at was, I had written several books before for medical purposes, but when I wrote my autobiography and study skills book, Straight A's, Stanford, on Harvard, my lawyer friends were mocking me. A couple quotes by Cicero quick. Cui bono, who benefits? That's pretty valuable information. That tells you what the reason behind things. Orator has three functions: to teach, to please, to move. Emotion is the most important thing. Yeah, when you start getting better at writing, you want to be able to evoke emotion. Rhyme is a magnet for the ear. Yeah, look at Eminem. He's an idiot savant, but man, he's entertaining because of the rhyme in his lyrics. Whenever something's real important, you want rhyme in there. Like, look at the O.J. Simpson thing. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. That's like the most memorable thing out of that whole event. Okay, so getting back to where did this all come from was, let me try to just move this picture out here. What happened was, I had written this book, which was a little bit autobiographical up until that time, and it was really to teach study skills. Because you can raise your academic IQ 30, 40 points if you know how to study, and they don't teach it in high school or college. And I had just read this guy's book, Dan Brown, author of Da Vinci Code, and I thought it was an incredible book, very entertaining. I think a lot of it's untrue, and I disagree with a lot of it, but in terms of entertainment, it was fantastic writing. So anyways, I have some friends, including some lawyer friends, who read my book, and they started making fun of me, that my writing wasn't so good, and it was awkward, or could have been improved greatly with a couple little tricks. And at first, I'm like, "Oh, you guys bullshitting me. Is that true?" And then once I looked at what they said, I realized they were right. And so I decided, you know what? I want to get good at writing. So I decided to basically read everything I could about learning how to write. And I reanalyzed Da Vinci Code. And I ended up writing my own book. It's on the 4th edition now. It's called Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic. How many pages is it? One sec. Here's what it looks like. Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic. Okay, it's a lot of pages here. It's 540 pages. So anyways, that's like the equivalent of a PhD postdoc in understanding how to write. I went through everything. Okay, so now let's go back through some more of these famous writers. So what I did was I decided to study all the great writers as best I could. Here is Socrates, the sort of the star character of Plato's writing. There's Plato. They're very sad because Socrates is going to die at 399 BC in Athens. This is a great painting of Jacques-Louis David, the great French artist. Okay, so a lot can be learned from them. Plato's style was very entertaining, and it was like a play. It was a dialogue. And the Socratic questioning method is also quite entertaining. I also went back, reviewed the Bible. A lot of great writing in the Bible. The reason the Bible's so great is, first of all, you have to know something about the Bible if you're going to understand English literature, because it's based on the Bible. The stories of the Bible, they come up all the time. And if you haven't read the Bible, you don't have to read the whole Bible cover to cover, drive yourself crazy, but you have to at least know some of the common stories. And an easy way to kind of get familiar with the Bible is watch the movie. Watch a movie of different episodes from the Bible, and then read, the key parts. And you'll find that works pretty well. Or hear a lecture on it, and then read the section. Put it in your bathroom in front of the toilet where you have a table, and you'll be able to get through parts of it pretty well. So anyways, when a piece of prose comes in confident and strong, it's more entertaining. And a lot of the great writers and great speakers I've seen were people who studied the Bible a lot in their younger years, and it just made them much better speakers. The way the 10 Commandments are so definitive, that makes them, resonate in our mind. People like something confident and certain. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not eat meat. Thou shalt not eat oil. Okay, thou shalt not have caffeine. Okay, that resonates. That sticks. Wimpy, modern, everything in moderation stuff, it stinks. Okay, it doesn't resonate with the human heart, the human soul. Okay, here's John Ruskin, and he's another one of these guys. By the way, most of these geniuses had some crazy thing about them. John Ruskin, he was from the mid-1800s, part of the Victorian Renaissance movement, the Tractarian movement. He rebelled against the Tractarian movement, but he was part of that Victorian Renaissance. Okay, and what was unique about him, he's sort of Scots Presbyterian Calvinist, if you will. His mother had him read the Bible every day when he was young, and he wrote in a really strong way. And his 1853 speech in defense of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, it's extraordinary. It's the best art critic speech ever in the history of all time. And so he would say really strong comments. Art is either instruction or infection. Okay, the greatest book ever written, I think, the greatest novel was by Charles Dickens. Here's Charles Dickens as a young man. Here he is, in middle age. And he had a tough childhood. His father was in debtor's prison, and he'd seen a lot. He had to go work, like in a shoe ink factory when he was young. So he had suffered a lot, and he understood what it's like to be poor and to have a rough life. And then he also worked with a legal firm, and it was like so he had a lot of experience for a young guy, and he was a genius. So anyways, Christmas Carol, I think, is the best novel ever written. The idea of redemption, and it's so concise, it's just sort of a perfect book. I think it's the best novel ever written. But anyways, that's Charles Dickens. So I'm showing you all these guys so you get a sense of the great writers, because if you want to get good at writing, you have to read a lot, because you just get used to swimming in words and being familiar with them. As Mozart said when he cranked out a whole bunch of concertos in a row, he said, I am immersed in music all day. I swim in music all day. Okay, so here's Victor Hugo. Les Mis is probably the second best book of all time. That, and then maybe Brothers Karamazov, the third greatest novel of all time. And his other book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's an incredible book. It's absolutely incredible book. This is, Victor Hugo's quite old in this picture, but he was another literary genius. And Ayn Rand said he's the greatest writer who ever lived. To read one of his books is like you're walking into a cathedral. And he does create this incredible story. He shows the greatness of mankind. It's wonderful. Oh, here's Charles Dickens' Dream with a lot of characters from his book. It's a very nice painting there by William Buss. Okay, so I go through all this to give you an idea of what's been done before. If you want to get good at something, I'm talking about trying to really get good, you have to study the people who've gone before you, because you get an idea of what's possible, and then, you ask yourself, can you improve on it, or what can you do different that would be nice, or, just do the best you can with whatever you got to do. But anyways, are people getting dumber? I think they are. Back in the 1800s, people routinely read these 500 to 1,200 page novels. Here's Les Mis, incredibly long book, about 1,200 pages. Brothers Karamazov, it's about 800 pages by Dostoevsky, the Russian writer. Anna Karenina was beautifully described. And I like Tolstoy because he had accuracy of perception, it's been described. And you read Tolstoy and you're like, yeah, I could see that really happening. But Tolstoy is a little bit bankrupt once you start going deeper into his philosophy. Okay, so anyways, they would break these novels into 3 parts and call them triple-decker novels. That way the library could rent out the beginning, the middle part, and the end part, and get more rentals out of it, and more people could be enjoying it simultaneously. So anyways, I think that, by being healthy, a person increases their attention span, and there's too much quick gratification nowadays with, social media and all that stuff and Twitter and whatnot. But I'm giving you a sense of these great big books and what it was like. My attitude about these big books is, yeah, we're all busy nowadays, but the way to go through these books is to listen to the audio CD if you have to commute, and then you can just read the good parts on your own time. If you don't have time to read the whole book and you want to actually expose yourself to it. And read the author's quotes. That's a real good way to get a sense of an author. Here's a classic comic. Sometimes you just read the classic comics version first, then you listen to the big book, and you kind of get all these things exposure to it, so you get a sense of it. There's Lady Liberty leading the people. Okay, here's another great writer. There's Oscar Wilde. So I love Oscar Wilde because he's an Irishman who went to England, and everybody hated him for being Irish. But despite the fact that they hated him, he was able to become the most popular writer in all of England as a playwright. And so here he is. He put on a big show. He was great with chiasmus as a literary technique. And so he was part of the so-called aesthetic movement, or art for art's sake. And then he's sort of quite different than Ruskin. Ruskin was actually his professor at Oxford. But again, he was sort of the later half of the Victorian Renaissance movement. Okay, here is Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and I've done several videos about them debating, and it's a great debate. So basically, he promoted atheism, he promoted Christianity, and you'll see the arguments for both. And in the end, in my opinion, Dostoevsky won by a mile, but it's a rather interesting debate. Another thing too is I spent time studying comedians because, I love Rodney Dangerfield. He's the patron saint of married men. He looks a lot like my father. And he was an incredible writer. I mean, sure, he had other people writing for him as well, but man, does he capture the funny aspect of being a married guy. And it's just very clever. It's very erudite, Rodney Dangerfield's whole joke routine. And, I was a little socially awkward. I spent too much time studying and working when I was young, and I also, nobody wanted to talk to me about books, so I got in the habit, the same technique I used to study stuff for school, I would just memorize all these comedy routines. So I knew all of Rodney Dangerfield, Chris Rock, Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy, and I could recite all that stuff, all the time, and my friends all loved it. Nowadays, everyone's scared to tell a joke because somebody will get them in trouble. Back then, we used to just play games all day long, rattling off jokes. Things have changed. Here's Tom Wolfe. He's a great writer, and if you really study sophisticated prose, man, is he good. He used a lot of onomatopoeia that was just incredible. And so, what would you want to read from him? A Man in Full is a decent book. Kingdom of Speech is a decent book. They're actually quite good. Again, I go through tons of audiobooks because I got to commute. So I listen to stuff while I'm commuting to work. Okay, Ayn Rand, she's the smartest woman who ever lived. She's an incredible genius. Just read through her quotes and you'll be, holy crap, is this lady smart. And she had a tough life, growing up initially in Russia, and then her family had to flee Russia. And she also really dug through the ancient philosophers as well as the so-called Enlightenment philosophers and whatnot. So she really had a wonderful historical perspective. My favorite book of hers is Romantic Manifesto, where she talks about why was the art and literature of the 1800s so magnificent and why did it deteriorate so badly in the 1900s. Atlas Shrugged is her best novel, which is a great book, also quite long. Again, go with the audio CD if you're too busy for time, if you want to get through that. Here's Ann Coulter, and you'll notice you'll hear all the time, Ayn Rand's a bitch, Ann Coulter is a bitch also, blah, blah, blah. Whenever a woman is a genius, it's weird, but they get tons of people who hate them, okay? That's funny, but just read their books. You'll see they have an incredible ability, both of them, to develop an idea. Coulter is a lot funnier than Rand, but Rand is a much more profound thinker. Okay, Trinity by Leon Uris. This guy is a genius. Now, this book, I'm currently reading this book, and it's a 35-hour long audio CD book, and it's magnificent. It reminds me in a sense almost like Brothers Karamazov in terms of being so long. It's like watching a soap opera. And he did an amazing job of capturing the life of the Irish people from 1800 to 1917. There was parts of it I didn't like. I thought he was a little bit too anti-church, and I'm listening to it. The narrator's got a wonderful Irish accent, which makes it more entertaining. He speaks like all my relatives do from Ireland. But anyways, it's a magnificent book, so I just mentioned that. You see the guy get interviewed. He's obviously a brilliant guy. All right, so now we're going to start getting into literature. So I want to just give you a taste of great writing. And everybody writes for their own purpose. You're not probably going to want to write a novel, but novels expose you to a lot of prose. And just listening to prose every day in the car or when you have a chance, however your life works, you just get good with words. I used to like, if no one was home, I would walk around while I'm eating and listen to an audiobook. I just wanted my mind to be bathed in the words of the great writers. And I found that real helpful. So a couple points on writing before we get into all the quotes and all the details. The best writing is like infotainment. It should be informative, good stuff right away, and it should be entertaining, useful, and fun. You want to provide value. If you're writing a longer book or anything, you want to make sure there's good stuff right on the first page. There should be something good in the first paragraph. Because, most books stink. I would say 4 out of 5 books stink, and a big part of it, right away, sometimes the author actually has something useful to say and they're intelligent, they just don't know how to write, and they might waste your time for a couple pages. And if they've had a unique experience, like they went somewhere special or experienced something special, I'll give them a chance and keep listening. But usually a good writer can surprise you and entertain you on the first page, and they should. The reader's busy. They got a lot of other things they could do to entertain themselves. So you have to show them that whatever you're writing is worth their time. Get to the point quickly. Be concise. A good writer gets to the good stuff as fast as possible. Again, you should think that if you're writing, you're talking to an intelligent friend. What would you say to them? You don't need to go through all the basic stuff that everyone already knows. That's a waste of time. Don't worry too much about formality. And this, again, is if you're writing to communicate, that you want to entertain, to inform. That's how you write. Sometimes you have to play the game of the context of what you're doing. If you're writing, for a job, if you're writing for a formal situation where you're presenting something to a bunch of people who are older than you and they're trying to decide if you're going to get tenure, then go along with whatever is the standard context for that setting. But if you are trying to communicate just for enjoyment and for helping people, then, talk like you're talking to an intelligent friend, and it should be fun. It should be entertaining, Good information, we want to learn it. We want to remember it. Chapter titles should be fun. That's a sign of a good writer. If you want to make sure the chapter title makes sense, you know what they're talking about, but it also should be entertaining, puns, wordplay, all of that is good. Because basically, if an author can't come up with a good title, I think this was said by Schopenhauer, if they can't come up with a good title for their book in their first chapter, how are they going to ever come up with anything else good? Yeah, usually if the book sucks, the first 5 pages, it sucks all the way through, unless it's sort of a naive writer who had an incredible experience and they just don't know how to write, and it takes them a while to get going. But most of the time, I know by the first page if the guy knows how to write or not. Okay, a writer is like a farmer. Whatever books he reads, conversations he has, courses, videos he watches, whatever, they're like the seeds that are planted. His books are the harvest. So what I mean by that is, if you're writing a book, you should try to listen to audio CD books or that will help you to write that book, that they somehow relate to it in a way that's positive. The other thing that's fantastically helpful is having at least one intelligent friend that you can have conversations with, conversations about the book, conversations about the topic, because that will help put it in your mind and make it clear how other people see the issue. So then you'll know what you have to explain, what you could leave out. So that's a very helpful thing to do. As a matter of fact, if you have to write something, a lot of people are writing something for school or some more brief essay type of thing. One of the best things you could do is have a conversation with a friend, and as soon as you're done with the conversation with a friend, sit down and write everything out, because that's as fresh and clear as it'll ever get into your mind, and you'll have a better sense of how someone else sees the topic. Because it's easy to know how you see the topic, but you might have unique experience that your reader doesn't. So talking to someone in a conversation, it just gets the words to flow in your mind. And the best time to write is first thing in the morning when you wake up. Don't do anything else. Just sit down and write. And you want to be good at writing because it'll enrich your life. It makes you a better thinker. It makes you a better communicator. Plus, if anybody messes with you, you have the ability to formulate, the best possible response. Because people who are illiterate and people who can't write, I've seen in life, they're more likely to get screwed over and they're helpless. They can't verbally defend themselves. They're like a dumb animal. So it is good to be articulate. It is good to be able to write well. Doesn't guarantee you'll have a better life, but it sure does improve the odds. Avoid cliches. That's a sign, that you're a lightweight if you're using cliches, especially right in the first paragraph. You can make a joke out of cliches, but don't. Watch out for so-called McLiterature. That means to use vulgar trends of the moment. Don't go by social media or legacy media, because in general, especially legacy media, stinks. So you don't want to go by that. Kitsch is just, again, sort of cliche. You want to avoid that type of thing. This was a note to myself to include some of these writers. I wrote Tom Wolfe. I had a picture of Tom Wolfe, I think, in there somewhere. And then Shakespeare. What was interesting about Shakespeare is Shakespeare was a Catholic. That's why he couldn't talk about himself too much. And that's why nobody knows almost anything about him, because back in his day, if you admitted you were a Catholic in England, one of the Puritan types would kill you. Okay, so you can't do that. Okay, how to write better, some quotes. And this one comes from George Orwell from his essay, Why I Write. He was a great English writer of the mid-1900s. And here's George Orwell. There are four great motives for writing prose. The first is egoism. The great mass of human beings are not acutely selfish. After the age of about 30, they abandon individual ambition. In many cases, indeed, they almost abandon the sense of being an individual at all, and they live chiefly for others, or they are simply smothered under drudgery. But there is also the minority of gifted, willful people who are determined to live their own lives to the end, and writers belong to this class. Serious writers, I should say, are on the whole more vain and self-centered. Number 2, aesthetic enthusiasm. Perception of beauty in the external word or in the words and in the right arrangement, pleasure in one sound or another, in the firmness of good prose or in the rhythm of a good story, a desire to share an experience which one feels is valuable. Number 3, historical impulse, a desire to see things as they are, to find out the true facts, and to store them up for use of posterity. So that would be like Thucydides, the great Greek writer who wanted to let everyone know what actually happened in the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Aesthetic enthusiasm, somebody who really enjoys the prose, and you have to like it to get good at it because it takes a lot of time and effort. And also what he said here, most people, they kind of give up their own life and just live for their kids. Number 4, desire to push the world in a certain direction. George Orwell from Why I Write. And you can see how you've got an internal rhyme here. Why I Write. There's always a little cleverness in Orwell. The deeper you look at it, the better he is. His books 1984 and Animal Farm are incredible. Plus his whole life story is fascinating. I did a previous entire video about him. Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton, he's the guy who wrote Jurassic Park, Travels, and a bunch of other good books. Next. He was a real genius. He went to medical school at Harvard, but then he decided to not be a clinical physician and just became a writer. He's incredible at writing the so-called techno-thriller like Jurassic Park. And I remember stories about his personal life. He would go to the bookstore and he would buy like $500 worth of books and just store them up in all these boxes. And then he would read constantly and write his novels and stuff. Rather incredible. So here's a quote from Michael Crichton. Everyone has an agenda except me. Here's a quote from Lewis Wolpert. Art is different than science. If Watson and Crick had not discovered the DNA helix, someone else would have. However, if Shakespeare had not written Hamlet, it would never have been written. Yep, that's unique about art. Okay, that's the end of part 1 of writing, and I got a whole bunch of other parts for future reference, but just to kind of get a sense of it. And the goal will be, how can one become better at writing? And we'll go through a lot of stuff.